The Passionate One, a Billionaire Bride Pact Romance, Book 1, written by Jeanette Lewis and narrated by Faye. Epigraph. I, Erin Marie Parker, do solemnly swear that someday I'll marry a billionaire, or I will have to sing the Camp Wallachie song, With the Bird Calls, at my wedding. Chapter 1. The Camp Wallachie girls all ended up on the same row at the wedding. Erin Parker, the last to arrive, was greeted with a chorus of squeals and hugs. She took the seat at the end of the aisle and shifted to adjust the skirt of her silvery gray dress. After brushing her rose gold hair out of her eyes, she leaned forward and beamed down the row at her girls. It was as if no time at all had passed, and they were kids at camp again, sharing care packages from home, riding the zip line into the lake, roasting marshmallows around the campfire, and telling creepy stories in the cabin with flashlights under their chins. Erin's stories were usually the best, probably because she had the most authentic ear-splitting scream, which she liked to spring on them when they least expected it. She always had to tell her story last, because the resulting chaos would usually bring in a counselor who would yell at them to go to sleep. Erin looked again at the row of women sitting beside her. Okay, some things had changed. The scrawny, scabby knees were gone, as was most of the acne, and they'd all filled out, some more than others. Lindsay, beautiful with her enormous blue eyes and pouty lips. Taylor, still tall and skinny, but not all arms and legs anymore. And Holly, polished and perfect as always in her designer dress and expensive highlights. To her right, Mackenzie sighed. "Isn't this beautiful?" she said to Erin. Erin glanced around. There was no denying that the West Laurel Hill Cemetery in Ballackinwood, Pennsylvania, was a beautiful place. The grass was still green, despite the crisp September air, but many of the trees were wearing their autumn colors. The splashes of red, yellow, and orange created a nice contrast to the blue of the sky and the white and gray tones of the graves. The aisle between the rows of transparent chairs was a carpet of autumn leaves, ending at the Louis Burke Mausoleum. Who was Louis Burke? And why did he merit such a grand final resting place, complete with Ionic Roman columns and a weathered copper gate? The engraving on the gate featured a sorrowful maiden in a melodramatic pose that brought a sweet ache to Erin's throat. The bereaved widow? The grieving daughter? Maybe the anguished lover? Her mind churned with possibilities. The gloominess of the mausoleum was tempered slightly by the flowers in shades of cranberry, pale pink, and ivory that were banked along its wide stone steps. Erin had to admit it looked gorgeous. But still, who gets married in a cemetery? Mackenzie laughed. That's Nikki. You didn't think she'd pick somewhere normal, did you? Erin couldn't say. Nikki had always been a little quirky, but Erin hadn't been privy to her wedding plans. In fact, she hadn't known Nikki was even engaged until she got the invitation. They'd all tried to keep in touch over the years following camp, but some were better at it than others, and their contact had become less and less frequent as they got older and busier. Erin probably could have remembered what each of her friends was doing now if pressed, but she'd have to think about it a little bit first. Which was part of the reason she'd been so excited for the wedding. Taylor's wedding 4 years earlier didn't count, because Taylor had eloped and hadn't invited anyone. This was the first time most of the group had been together again, making it the perfect opportunity to catch up. "Do you know the groom?" Erin asked Mackenzie. "Not at all." Mackenzie shook her head. "But I hear he's loaded." She elbowed Holly, who sat on her other side. "Isn't that right?" "What?" Holly looked up from her phone. "Isn't Darren super rich?" Mackenzie repeated. Holly nodded. "I think he owns some kind of software company." "Count it." Erin smiled in satisfaction. "We never said it had to be inherited money." What are you talking about? Holly wrinkled her perfect brows. The Billionaire Bride Pact, Erin clarified. Remember? I remember, Mackenzie put in. Understanding dawned in Holly's eyes. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Erin glanced at Holly's left hand, where a diamond the size of a small Volkswagen glittered on her ring finger. I guess it's lucky you found your rich guy then, she said, widening her eyes dramatically. Or you'd get the consequence. The Billionaire Bride Pact had been her idea, because, of course it had, and the notion that anyone had simply forgotten about it wrinkled a bit. Holly gave her a small, tight smile. I guess. Do you know what these chairs are called? Mackenzie said amid the sudden tension. She tapped the seat of her transparent chair with her long pink fingernails. Ghost chairs. Appropriate, no? Erin nodded, but her stomach was tight. Holly had always been hard to read, and the two of them had clashed more than once at camp. Erin had had a talent for annoying her then, and it looked like that hadn't changed. She looked down the aisle again, taking note of who was missing. Do you know if Kinley is coming? She asked. Of all the Wallachie girls, Erin missed Kinley the most. Maybe because they had such similar personalities. Mackenzie shook her head. I'm sure she wanted to be here, but with her crazy touring schedule, she probably couldn't get away. What about Alyssa? She's here, off taking pictures. Marin saving her a seat. Mackenzie nodded her head toward the empty seat at Marin's side. Alyssa and Marin had come to camp together. Erin wasn't surprised to see they were still friends. What about Summer? Who knows where Summer is? Mackenzie rolled her eyes. Probably sailing down the Veltava on a raft. They laughed. If anyone could be found sailing down the Veltava on a raft, it would be Summer. I'll bet she's wearing some funky bohemian outfit and has picked up at least one hunky Czech boyfriend, Erin said, leaping into the fantasy. Maybe more. I'm guessing more, Mackenzie said. There was a disturbance at the back, and they all turned to see the wedding party getting into position. I love weddings, Mackenzie sighed. Once it became obvious they weren't quite ready to start. Holly, have you decided where yours will be yet? Please have it outside, Erin urged, though maybe not in a cemetery. Ha, I'm getting married in the winter. Trust me, you do not want to be outside for very long in a Utah winter, Holly replied. But you could ride in on a sleigh pulled by white horses, Erin said excitedly. She could almost see it. With her dark hair, Holly would make a beautiful winter bride. The horses could have sleigh bells, and you could wear a white fur cape and carry a bouquet of red roses, mistletoe, and holly berries. It's perfect. She put her hand over her mouth and launched into her best Darth Vader wheeze. It's your destiny. Holly laughed. Maybe I should hire you as my wedding consultant. Erin shook her head, relaxing at the sound of Holly's laughter. Not my gig, but I'll give you that idea for free. They stopped talking as a pastor in a long black robe came down a side aisle, followed by a string quartet and a guitarist. The musicians took seats to the left of the mausoleum, while the pastor went to the steps. After a brief tuning, the guitarist began to play a series of chords, and the quartet joined in soon after. Erin had expected Canon in D, or some other wedding staple, and was pleasantly surprised when they began to play Can't Help Falling in Love. Everyone turned as the wedding party made its way down the carpet of autumn leaves, starting with Darren and the best man. Darren was not quite the kind of guy Erin would have imagined for Nikki, but he was cute in an understated way. His dark brown hair was newly trimmed, but still managed to look a bit shaggy, growing past his ears and long over his forehead. He had big, solemn brown eyes that made her think of a puppy poster, but when he smiled, they twinkled merrily at the guests. He was obviously having the time of his life. Erin had missed yesterday's pre-wedding dinner. "Is he nice?" she whispered to Mackenzie as Darren passed their row. "He's great," Mackenzie replied. "They're so cute together." Darren and the best man reached the front and took their places at the pastor's side as the parents began their walk down the aisle. Next came Nikki's 5 bridesmaids in long gowns of varying shades of pink, wine, and cranberry. They were escorted by groomsmen in black suits with ties that matched the color of the bridesmaid's dress. Erin's eye fell on the second groomsman in line, tall with dark wavy hair and looking mighty fine in his suit. "Check out number 2, she muttered. "Oh, yeah," Mackenzie replied. But as they came closer, Erin's hopes evaporated. Number 2 wore a wedding band. Bummer. The bridesmaids and groomsmen fanned out on either side of the pastor as the musicians paused, then started into the familiar wedding march. Erin couldn't suppress a squeal of delight when Nikki and her father arrived at the head of the aisle. Nikki's dress was ivory with a deep V neckline. The cap sleeves and fitted bodice were made from delicate lace that transitioned gradually into a flowing chiffon skirt. Her auburn hair was caught in a chignon at the base of her neck and covered by a veil edged in lace. She held a bouquet of creamy roses, accented with cranberry and pink flowers. Erin shot a glance at Darren and was satisfied to see his mouth open and his eyes gleaming with tears as he gazed at his bride. Pure devotion. The way it should be. Erin shifted in her seat as a dart of apprehension shot through her. Sometimes she caught Matt giving her that same kind of look, but that was silly. They were just friends, and he knew it. After the appropriate dramatic pause, Nikki and her dad started forward, the leaves rustling and crunching under their feet. When she passed the row with the Camp Wallacky girls, Nikki grinned and shot them a wink. The pastor spoke only a few words of advice before leading the couple through their vows. Erin had expected something a bit more dramatic, but it appeared Nikki and Darren were content with short and sweet. They hadn't even written their own vows. After a long kiss, the beaming newlyweds turned to face the applause and cheers from the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, Darren and Dominique Pendleton," the pastor announced, while the bride and groom shared another kiss. "The couple will greet guests here on the mausoleum steps. Then there are docents available if you'd like a tour of the cemetery. If you prefer to skip the tour, there are cars waiting to take you directly to the Stratshire Club for cocktails and refreshments. The reception will begin at 6. Erin and her friends joined the line. When they reached Nikki, she squealed and held out her arms. "My Wallacky girls!" For a minute there was chaos as everyone tried to hug and talk at once. But after a few minutes, Nikki glanced at the line of guests waiting to greet her. "Listen, I'll see you at the reception, okay?" She smiled. "I put you all at the same table, so make sure to save me a spot." They promised, and after a final hug, they moved away as a group to the cemetery road. "So what do you think?" Erin asked, eyeing the group of black-clad docents waiting for tour requests. Taylor huffed. "No offense to Nikki, but I really don't want to traipse around a cemetery in these heels. I'd rather find some wine." The rest of the girls agreed, so they piled into one of the waiting limos. Erin slid along the black leather seat to the front to make room for everyone. "One down," she said in triumph. "Almost 2, Alyssa put in. "Holly's got her man." "And Taylor," Lindsay added. All eyes went to Taylor, who stared fixedly out the window, even though the heavy tint made it hard to see much of anything. The unasked and unanswered question hung in the air. Did it count if you married your billionaire, then divorced him? "Nikki looks so pretty," Erin said quickly. "I loved her hair." The girls launched into a conversation about the wedding, the dresses, the colors, the setting, and especially the groomsmen. Erin realized she wasn't the only one hoping Darren had some wealthy friends. Though what were the chances they would all get to marry their dream man? The odds were pretty good someone would end up embarrassing themselves at their reception. Her mind drifted back to the day they'd made the pact. It had been raining for 3 days, and the camp was a quagmire of mud. After lunch, the counselors, evidently tired of cleaning up muddy footprints and trying to entertain scraggly groups of increasingly bored teenage girls, ordered everyone to their cabins with orders to stay there. They played several rounds of Uno, Phase 10, and dominoes, and Erin and Kinley did an impromptu talent show. But by mid-afternoon, everyone was bored and grumpy. Erin couldn't remember who came up with the idea of MASH. Mansion, apartment, shack, house. Marin handed out paper and they all listed 4 options for future dreams, including what kind of house they would have, who they would marry, where they would live, and how many children they would have. According to the rules, one of the options in each category had to be lame, like living in a shack, or ending up with 24 children, or marrying a boy you couldn't stand. One by one, they took turns picking a number and crossing off the corresponding items on their lists until they were down to 1 option each. "This is dumb," someone, probably Holly, had finally said. "I'm definitely not going to live in a shack. My daddy says I'm going to marry a rich man and live in a mansion. End of story." Erin had looked at Holly in awe. Aside from a few who attended on grants, the girls all came from affluent families. You had to be well off to afford Camp Wallachie. But the idea that you could plan to marry money was new to her. "Me too," Taylor had insisted. "Let's all promise to marry rich guys," Erin said as inspiration struck. So the Billionaire Bride Pact was made. They went around the room and each girl took her turn raising her hand and declaring, "I do solemnly swear that someday I'll marry a billionaire." Lindsay drew up a contract, and they all signed their names. As the years went by, they stayed in touch, and eventually acknowledged that maybe billionaires was a little unrealistic. Nevertheless, they periodically reaffirmed their pledge to marry well. And with Nikki's wedding, they were underway. Chapter 2. Cocktails were served in the 2-story lobby of the Stratshire Club. Erin had no doubt it was Bala Kinwood's most exclusive and expensive golf club. The room was dominated by a huge stone fireplace that reached the timbered ceiling. Leather couches and chairs and various earth-toned upholstery formed conversation areas, and framed photographs of Nikki and Darren were scattered throughout the room, some on side tables, others on large easels. Erin sipped a glass of white wine and studied one of the portraits. A black and white shot of Nikki in her wedding dress at the end of a long, arched gallery. She was looking down at her bouquet, and a soft breeze sent her veil curving in a long arc to her right. "Alyssa did these, did you know?" Taylor came to stand beside her. "They're great." Erin's eyes roved over other portraits, all stunning in their own way. Erin knew Alyssa was a successful photographer, but she hadn't seen much of her work. Taylor nodded. "She doesn't normally do formal portraits, but she made an exception for Nikki." "I hope she'll do the same for me," Erin said. She could already imagine her own set of bridal portraits. A flowing white gown, colorful flowers, maybe an exotic location like Venice or Tahiti. "Did we offend you in the car with all the talk about weddings?" she asked. Since the pact had been her idea, she felt oddly responsible for anything related to it. "No," Taylor shrugged. "I kind of expected to get some heat about it." Erin didn't know why Taylor and her husband had divorced, but sensed this wasn't the moment to ask. She wouldn't have had time anyway, since just then the club hostess called for the guests to come to the reception room. Any further conversation was lost in the noise of the crowd. The reception room felt like a fairyland, with swaths of ivory tulle draping from the 3 large chandeliers, across the ceiling and down the walls. A polished wood dance floor gleamed in front of a stage at one end, and dining tables with towering floral arrangements stood at the other. Nikki and Darren's monogram was projected in cranberry-colored lights onto one of the tulle walls, and a 6-tiered wedding cake held a place of honor in the center of the room. It was a masterpiece of cascading sugar flowers in Nikki's colors. Buffet tables laden with food lined the walls. Seafood, prime rib, chicken and creamy orange sauce, a dozen different types of salad, baskets of bread, and best of all, an entire wall of desserts, including fruit tarts, eclairs, cakes, and a chocolate fountain. Waiters in white shirts and black ties hurried between the tables in the kitchen, while a chef in a tall hat stood at the meat table to slice the prime rib. Erin and the other Camp Wallachie girls took their seats as the DJ announced the arrival of Nikki and Darren. Everyone cheered when the newlyweds rushed in, breathless and radiant. They went straight into their first dance to the song Sea of Love. Nikki had changed into a strapless blush-colored gown with a full tulle skirt and a heavily beaded bodice. She ditched the veil, and Erin could see that her hair was actually an intricately braided bun, not a chignon. She and Darren were almost the same height, and they gazed at each other while they swirled around the dance floor. The reception kicked into full gear after the dance. Erin sampled the delicious food, caught up with her friends, and danced with several men of varying degrees of cuteness. She was sitting at the table with a plate of chocolate-dipped goodies when Nikki appeared and plopped down in an empty chair. She held a bag of distinctive blue. "My feet are killing me," she moaned, setting the bag on the table and reaching for one of Erin's chocolate-dipped strawberries. "You look gorgeous," Erin replied, passing her a napkin. "A cemetery? I didn't see that one coming." "I know, right? Wasn't it awesome, though?" Nikki's eyes danced as she nibbled the strawberry. "Absolutely," Erin declared, loving the drama of it. "Is that from Tiffany?" Holly asked, eyeing the blue bag. "Yep." Nikki's gaze circled the table. "Everyone here?" "Alyssa's off taking pictures, and Taylor is dancing with some guy," Lindsay said, jumping to her feet. "I'll get them." Nikki snagged a piece of chocolate-covered shortbread from Erin's plate. "These are so good. I wanted to have potato chips at the chocolate fountain, but Darren's mom wouldn't let me. She said it would be tacky." She rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "I can see her point, but seriously, have you tried chocolate-covered potato chips? Yum!" "So, speaking of Darren," Erin prompted, "what's his story?" "You mean how did we meet, etc.?" Nikki asked. Erin nodded. "I couldn't make it to the rehearsal dinner, remember? I didn't get the details." "Oh, right. Well, Darren and I met last winter in Colorado when I went skiing with Holly." "I didn't know she was friends with him," Erin said, feeling a bit slighted. If Holly was going around introducing her friends to handsome millionaires, she wanted to be in on it. "He's not," Nikki said. "We were ice skating and I lost control and plowed into him. He forgave me after the blood stopped." "You're kidding," Erin said, eyes wide. "Not at all," Nikki replied. "This is so not fair," Erin declared. "I humiliate myself in front of hot guys all the time, and none of them have turned out to be rich bachelors ready to propose." She gave Nikki a shrewd look. "He is rich, right? This isn't all a show to get out of singing the song." The consequence for breaking the Billionaire Bride Pact was severe. Anyone who did not marry a rich man would have to stand at her wedding reception and sing the Camp Wallachie theme song to her guests, complete with the bird calls at the end. Worse, there could be no explanation beforehand. The bride just had to do it. "Taylor should have to do the song." Mackenzie leaned across the table. "I know Brent's loaded, but it doesn't count if you get divorced." "Not here, though," Nikki cut in. correctly interpreting the gleam of mischief in Erin's eyes. My mother-in-law was offended by potato chips. Can you imagine what she'd do if one of my friends stood up and started cawing? Just then, Lindsay appeared with the other girls, and everyone's attention immediately returned to the Tiffany bag. They all watched in breathless silence as Nikki pulled small blue boxes from the bag and passed them around the table. "Just something to show my appreciation," she declared. The boxes all held the same thing, a bracelet of white gold links with a flat, round disc dangling from the clasp. The 3 feathers of Camp Wallacky, representing faith, love, and loyalty, were picked out in diamonds on the disc. Everyone gasped in excitement and hurried to express their thanks. "Okay, I believe you." Erin turned her wrists so the diamonds danced in the lights. "You really did marry money." "Told ya." Nikki laughed. She tapped the 3 remaining boxes on the table. "I know how to reach Kinley in summer, but does anyone know where Trin is?" The girls exchanged uneasy looks. Trin had been in their cabin the year of the Billionaire Bride Pact, but they'd lost contact with her, and she'd never returned to Camp Wallacky. "Well, I'll figure something out," Nikki said after they were quiet for a minute. She slid the 3 remaining boxes back in the bag with a smile. "Okay, out with it. What have you all been doing?" They were chattering and laughing like old times when Darren swooped down on their table. "There you are," he said to Nikki. "I was afraid you'd run away." "What? Never!" She grinned and let him pull her to her feet. "Sorry, girls, it looks like my husband needs some attention. I'll try to come back." They moved away, arm in arm. "Aw, so cute." Alyssa smiled after them. Her hand drifted to her expensive camera on the table. "There's some great lighting in here. I'm going to get some more shots." Erin's head was pounding when the limo dropped her off at her hotel several hours later. Lindsay and Maren were making plans for everyone to meet for breakfast, but Erin had said her goodbyes tonight. She had to leave early the next morning. In her room, she dug through her suitcase for a bottle of Excedrin PM and shook out 2 tablets. Then, glancing at the red numbers of the bedside alarm clock, she groaned and put one back. She took the other pill with a swig of warm Coke from a can she'd left open on the desk and got ready for bed. Before going to sleep, Erin took one last look at the Tiffany bracelet, nestled safely in its box on the nightstand, and smiled. It had been a stretch to get away from rehearsals for the wedding, but she was glad she'd come, and not just because she now owned a genuine Tiffany bracelet. The pounding on the door woke her, and Erin poked her head out from under the blankets. For a moment she was disoriented. Then the pounding came again, along with the faint call through the heavy door. "Housekeeping!" Erin whipped her head around to see the clock. 10:33. "No!" she cried, throwing back the blankets and leaping from bed. "No, no, 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 no!" She threw the deadbolt and opened the door a crack. A small, dark-haired woman in a pristine navy blue uniform gave her a smile. "Good morning. Do you want housekeeping?" No, I'm leaving. I'm supposed to be—" Erin's panic grew. "I'm sorry, I'll be out of here in a few minutes." The woman gave her a sympathetic nod. "I'll come back." Erin dug her phone from the evening bag she'd tossed on the dresser the night before. Across the front of the lock screen was a banner notice from her calendar. Johnson & Johnson audition, 11 a.m. It was a 2-hour drive to New York City, and she should be there right now, clutching her headshots in the waiting area with 100 other hopefuls. Her fingers shook as she unlocked the phone and pulled up Brianna's number. "Brianna Holstead," her agent answered on the second ring. "Hello, Erin. I wasn't expecting to hear from you for a while. How'd it go?" Erin bit her lip. "I'm still at the hotel," she admitted. There was a pause. "Please tell me you mean a hotel in Manhattan?" Brianna said in clipped tones. Erin winced. No, Pennsylvania. She rushed ahead before Brianna could reply. I'm sorry, I had a headache last night, so I took a nighttime painkiller, and I didn't hear my alarm. No need to admit she'd forgotten to even set the alarm. Do you think you could call them and reschedule? It's a casting call, not a doctor's appointment, Brianna snapped. You can't just reschedule. I know, I'm sorry, Erin agreed miserably. Is there anything you can do? Brianna heaved a gusty sigh. Probably not, but I'll give it a try. You get on the road right now, and I'll call you as soon as I know something. She hung up. There was no time for a shower. Erin flicked a comb through her hair and pulled it into a low ponytail. She raced through the room, throwing everything into her suitcase haphazardly. She could do her makeup at stoplights. She did one last check to make sure she had everything, then left the hotel keys in the room and hurried to her car. Hopefully there were no extra charges beyond the room. She didn't have much space left on her credit card. A sense of futility overwhelmed her. There was probably not much Brianna could do. Maybe she would be better off going home. A 5-hour drive in the opposite direction. But she'd taken the entire day off from rehearsal for this audition. It seemed like such a waste to not even try. She'd been driving for half an hour when Brianna called back and got right to the point. They said no rescheduling. Erin groaned. Are you sure? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. Sorry, kiddo, I tried. I know, it's my fault. I'll do better next time. I hope so, Brianna said before they said goodbye. Erin got off the freeway at the next exit and pulled into a gas station. She reached for her phone and scrolled to Matt's number. He answered immediately. Hey, I've been hoping to hear from you. Is it over already? He had to talk loudly to be heard over the roar of the furnaces in the glass studio where he worked. For me it is. Erin got out before she started crying. Erin, what's wrong? Are you okay? Yes, she gulped, taking a deep breath. But I missed the audition and they wouldn't let me reschedule. Hang on, let me go outside, Matt said. The noise faded as he left the studio, probably stepping out the side door into the narrow brick alley. Okay, you there? She quickly filled him in on the details. When she finished, he sighed. What a bummer. Where are you now? About 90 minutes from the city. Are you too upset to drive? I can have Corbin bring me out there and I'll drive you home. Yeah, sure, it's the middle of a workday. I'm sure you can both drop everything for a 10-hour road trip. I will if you need me, he insisted, and she knew he meant it. That was Matt, always willing to help, always prepared to go above and beyond, especially where she was concerned. She heaved a deep sigh. I'll be okay. I'm just bummed. Come over when you get home, okay? Promise? She promised, then went into the gas station to use the restroom and stock up on chocolate. It would be a long drive. Chapter 3. Morgantown, West Virginia was no New York City, but it was home to the Azure Company, one of the best regional theaters in the country. Artistic director Sean Moran Azure had been a Broadway star in his day, and now he specialized in turning out high-quality productions, many of them destined for the Great White Way. Actors from all over the country flocked to Morgantown in hopes it would provide the foot in the door they were so desperately seeking. Erin had moved there 3 years ago with stars in her eyes, and now she'd blown one of her big chances. I still don't get why this commercial is so important, Matt said when she got to his apartment several hours later. You're in the play, that's what counts, right? I guess. She was lying on his couch, her voice muffled by the pillow she'd pulled over her face. But I need more TV experience. Plus, they pay better than the play. Come out of there and let's talk about it, Matt urged. She felt the couch dip as he sat beside her. No! She clutched the pillow tighter. I'm never coming out. I'm a big dumb idiot and I don't deserve to live. What did Brianna say? Matt asked. About what? The audition or the fact that I'm a big dumb idiot? Start with the first one and work your way up from there. Was she mad? Erin needed air. She lowered the pillow and took several deep breaths. Her face was hot and strands of hair stuck to her sweaty forehead. Matt reached out and smoothed them back, his work-roughened fingers catching in the fine strands. Yes? I mean, she didn't yell or anything, but her voice was tense, Erin said. She's an agent. They're always tense. I think tense is in the job description. Matt's smile made his eyes crinkle at the corners. He had blue eyes that matched the cadet blue Henley he wore. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing tanned forearms, embossed with ropey muscles and burn scars. He was clean-shaven, though Erin knew that when he did let his beard grow, it came in several shades darker than his sandy blonde hair. Am I ruined? She asked him. Because you missed one audition? She clutched the pillow to her chest. Everyone's going to know I'm a flake and no one will hire me. Erin, come on. How many people probably auditioned for the honor of swishing mouthwash on camera? I don't know. Maybe 100. And it wasn't mouthwash, she said defensively. It was toothpaste. Okay, toothpaste. He grinned. How many commercials are made every year? Thousands, she admitted grudgingly. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? Don't try to logic me out of it. You know I'm right, he said smugly. No matter what Brianna says, it's not the end of the world. You can try again with the next one. But what if Brianna decides to fire me? Erin said, her anxiety rising again. Fire you? You pay her, right? And at the moment you have a pretty sweet gig with the play. I highly doubt Brianna's going to give that up. Besides, once the show opens and everyone sees how amazing you are, agents will be clamoring to represent you, and Brianna will be the one worrying about keeping you. She was silent for a moment, processing this, then sat up and gave him a quick hug. I feel better. Thank you. For a moment, something flared in his blue eyes, a look she'd seen before, one they'd agreed to step carefully around. Well, not agreed in so many words, but they both knew Matt's feelings ran deeper than Erin's, and there was an unspoken arrangement not to talk about it. She swung her legs to the floor and reached for a sculpture on the side table. This is nice. Is it one of yours? It was a knot, bigger than her fist, made from one continuous rope of glass. She turned it over and over, following the glass as it twisted until she reached the end. Matt was always bringing home pieces he made at his studio, Morgantown Art Glass. Erin had an owl he'd made on the dresser in her bedroom. Just a warm-up piece, Matt said as he got up from the couch. How about one of Matt's famous mug brownies? Sounds perfect. She returned her attention to the knot. She loved the weight of it and the way the glass slid smoothly through her fingers. What are you working on now? Christmas ornaments, he said as he took 2 mugs from the cupboard and began measuring out flour, sugar, salt, and cocoa powder. How are they going? He put the butter in the microwave to melt. Okay, nothing very exciting, but it pays the bills. Mostly. Matt and Erin kept no secrets from one another. She knew the glass studio wasn't as profitable as he'd wish, and he knew her acting wasn't as profitable as she'd wish. Hey, what were you just telling me? Erin reminded him. You'll get there someday too. Your work is amazing. She held up the glass knot. This is really cool. You can have it, and I'll make you a dozen more if you want. Matt poured the butter into the mugs and stirred. And I'm only telling the truth. You will get there someday, and when you're a huge star, I'll tell all the tabloids how you used to try and smother yourself with my couch pillows. She laughed. Well, I'm telling the truth, too. You're very talented. He put the mugs in the microwave and turned to give her a grateful smile. How was the wedding? Good. Erin shrugged. Beautiful bride, handsome groom, pretty dresses. What else can you ask for? And I take it he's loaded? Matt knew about the Billionaire Bride Pact. Of course. Erin sighed. I guess Nikki's going to live happily ever after. Money doesn't guarantee happily ever after, he murmured. Erin decided not to answer. Instead, she got up from the couch and joined him in the kitchen, opening the fridge. Please tell me you have whipped cream. In the back. He took the brownies from the microwave as Erin emerged victorious with the can. She baptized her brownie in a mound of whipped cream, ending with a curly flourish on the top. Hey, how about a brownie with your whipped cream? Matt teased. Erin's only response was to add more. What's your rehearsal schedule like this week? He asked as they took seats at the kitchen counter and dug into the brownies. Busy. We open in 3 weeks. Oh, before I forget, I saw Mrs. Brinkerhoff in the laundry room last week. She's going to visit her son and didn't have anyone to dog sit for her, so I told her we could do it. Matt swallowed a bite of his brownie. There are 3 things wrong with that sentence. Mrs. Brinkerhoff, we, and dog sitting. Come on, she's a sweet old lady and she doesn't have anyone else. All we have to do is stop in a couple of times a day to make sure the dog's got food and water. Maybe take it on a walk once in a while, no big deal. Matt sighed and raked his fingers through his hair. You know, usually when you say that, I find out it's actually a very big deal. When have I ever done that? Erin scoffed. Chelsea? I thought you'd forgiven me for Chelsea. When she was between shows, Erin took hourly jobs with flexible schedules so she could work around auditions. Chelsea had been her coworker at the mall, and Erin had impulsively offered to help her move, only to learn she was the only one who'd offered to help. She'd enlisted Matt, whose mood had darkened considerably when they arrived with the truck, to find Chelsea still in bed and only partly packed. Erin tried to ignore his dirty looks as they threw Chelsea's belongings in boxes. Just because I forgave you doesn't mean I forgot about it, Matt said loftily. And how about the time you offered to give that guy you met at auditions a ride home, only to find out he lived in Wooster, Ohio, and was creepy besides? Erin flinched. The pimply kid named Jasper had seemed nice enough while they'd waited for their turns to audition. He'd asked for a ride home, and she agreed, not realizing until later that Jasper conveniently neglected to mention he lived over 3 hours away. He'd ridden the bus to the audition, but was very happy for a free ride home. She hadn't noticed the outline of the knife in his pocket until they were in her car. She'd sent Matt a frantic text and had picked him up at the studio to ride along. Matt had had to go back to work afterward and was so tired. His concentration had slipped and he'd suffered a bad burn. Erin knew the burn wasn't directly her fault, but even more than a year later, she still had a prickling of guilt about the silvery scar on his forearm. This is different, Erin protested. We already know where Mrs. Brinkerhoff lives, and she isn't moving. Will you help me, please? She put on her most winning smile. He sighed. When do we start? You're the best, Erin beamed. She's leaving Sunday. Then my only other question is, which movie do you want to watch tonight? A night with movies, brownies, and Matt was about the best thing she could have asked for. By the time Erin went back to her own apartment, she felt much better about the missed audition. Chapter 4. Matt arrived at the studio the next morning to find his little brother Corbin already there. The furnaces were roaring, immediately blasting any chill from the autumn air. They'd filled the day tank with glass pellets the night before, and Corbin stood at its open door, his face ruddy in the glow as he collected a gather with a blowing pipe. Matt hung his jacket on the hooks near the open door that separated the showroom from the studio. When he stepped inside, the noise increased immediately. The furnaces were already loud, but add in the dozen or so large fans they ran to keep the temperature bearable, and the noise level was somewhere around a dull roar. Corbin stepped back from the furnace, his eyes fixed on the ball of molten glass on the end of the pipe. He turned it, watching the way the glass flowed, gauging whether it was ready to work. Their father had founded Morgantown Art Glass 30 years ago, only 3 months after Matt was born. He sometimes wondered if their shared beginning was one reason he felt such a connection to the place. Or maybe it was because he'd grown up there. He remembered being a little boy, standing at the window between the studio and the showroom, and watching in awe as his father created art from nothing more than sand mixed with a handful of soda ash and lime. Of course, the exact ratios were a bit more exact, but to a 6-year-old, it was magic. He'd started working in the studio when he was 10, but only as the janitor. It wasn't until he turned 13 that his dad allowed him to start working with anything dangerous. Corbin was 3 years younger and had eagerly joined the team, taking over the cleaning tasks while Matt turned his attention to the glass. Matt glanced at the wall opposite the furnaces, where several pictures of their father hung, posing in front of the studio with Mom, pulling a gather from the furnace, sitting at the bench shaping a piece. His obituary hung next to the last photo, along with the article from the local newspaper about the car accident that had taken his life. The pain in Matt's chest when he thought of his dad still sometimes burned as hot as the furnace. Corbin let the gather drop back into the pool of molten glass at the bottom of the furnace and turned to Matt. "That look okay?" Matt asked. "Yep, ready to go." They were working on a commission from the mayor's office. 200 Christmas ornaments of clear glass, circled by accent bands of red, green, and white. Not the most exciting project, but Matt was grateful for the work. As any artist knew, commission was a magic word when it came to keeping the lights on. And fuel, and supplies, and equipment. His father had built the studio for the same reason his sons kept it: the art, not the money. But Matt saw the bills piling up month after month, and he knew the future of the business was nearly as fragile as the glass it produced. Chapter 5. "Welcome back, Erin." Director Mona Stevens extended several typewritten pages toward her. "Jerome made some changes while you were gone." Erin stifled a groan as she took the papers. She had her lines memorized weeks ago, but the playwright, Jerome Kirby, kept making so many changes that she shouldn't have bothered. One of the dangers of working with a brand new play, she supposed. Hopefully, the glory would make up for the grief when they took it to Broadway. No one really knew how realistic Broadway was. Several big-time New York producers had come to sit in on rehearsals and would probably be coming for opening night. But Jerome, Mona, and Sean, owner of the Azure Company, all maintained a tight-lipped silence about the play's prospects. Based on the life of novelist Charlotte Bronte, the play was set from her teenage years to her death at age 38. But instead of merely being biographical, the script delved deeply into the creation process, showing how personal tragedy drove Charlotte's retreat to her imaginary worlds. By the end of the show, the lines between fantasy and reality were so blurred, Charlotte couldn't tell them apart. Erin had the lead role, and as Charlotte, she relished the opportunity to portray this fragile, intelligent woman whose writing had been so ahead of her time. Her favorite part was at the end of Act 1, when Charlotte confronts Constantine Heger, her unrequited love. Erin had worked endlessly on Charlotte's emotional outburst, seeking to capture the complexity of her feelings. She was close, but still felt a struggle to do justice to the moment. "The rewrites aren't too bad this time," Jocelyn whispered from her seat on Erin's right. As bad as the constant changes were for Erin, Jocelyn had it worse. She played Charlotte's fictional character, Jane Eyre, but since she was also Erin's understudy, she had to learn and relearn Erin's part, along with her own. "That's a relief," Erin muttered as she thumbed through the new pages. She was relieved to find Jerome had left her favorite scene alone. "So, we have not quite 3 weeks until we open," Mona said, calling the cast to order. She was a tall woman with creamy skin and a bright crown of silvery hair which she wore in shorter-length corkscrew curls. Her pronounced bone structure and dark, shadowed eyes gave her the look of a tall, fierce bird. "Yeah, can someone please tell Jerome?" Jacob Tuttle, Erin's co-star, said sourly. "How are we supposed to build a cohesive show when he keeps changing everything?" Mona fixed him with a look. "I've been in shows where the writer changed a key scene at intermission, and we learned it and performed it without complaint." Jacob had opened his mouth to say more, but seemed to think better of it. He sat in sullen silence, his eyes fixed on his script. "Any other questions?" Mona asked briskly. "When do we get the stage?" asked Sasha, who played Emily Bronte. "The set designer promised me access at the beginning of next week. Until then, we'll have to make do." Mona swept her hand around the rehearsal room, where folding chairs and other pieces of furniture had been pressed into service as the set. "Let's start at the top of Act 2, she said, moving toward the wall where her table was set up. "Erin, mark it with Jocelyn the first few times to get the new blocking." The actors took their places and launched into the scene. Despite her frustration over the constant changes, Erin couldn't help feeling a wave of excitement. She loved performing, but in truth, this was why she loved acting. This process of becoming someone else, of developing a living, breathing person completely separate from her, even though they shared the same body. There was nothing like it in the world. They worked throughout the morning with only a quick coffee break. At noon, Quincy, the stage manager, signaled for the lunch break. 30 minutes, people," he announced loudly, "which means you cannot be back until—" He consulted his watch. 12:33. Erin rolled her eyes. According to union rules, every actor must get 30 minutes for lunch, which had somehow come to mean every actor had to spend exactly 30 minutes, not 1 second less, off the stage and out of rehearsal areas. It felt a bit like those days at camp when everyone had to stop swimming and get out of the water, completely out of the water, for 5 minutes at the top of every hour. You couldn't even dip a toe in, or a lifeguard would blow a whistle. The memory brought other memories of Camp Wallace flooding back. Holly and Summer giving makeovers, Taylor and Lindsay sneaking food from the kitchen for their late-night parties, and of course, she and Kinley entertaining them all with songs and skits. "Erin, are you listening?" Jocelyn's voice cut through her daydreams. "Sorry," she grinned sheepishly. "Lost in thought. Want to get some lunch at the deli?" Erin nodded, and they walked the 3 blocks to the Bridgeport Deli, a staple of Morgantown. Some of the other cast members were already there. They motioned the 2 girls over, but after an apologetic wave, Jocelyn led the way to a secluded booth in the corner. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Jocelyn put down her turkey wrap and gave Erin a serious look. "What?" "There's a rumor Jacob's going to be replaced." Erin almost choked on a bite of her chef salad. 3 weeks to opening? No way. Jocelyn shrugged. "It happens. My friend Vincente is an ensemble dancer in The Lion King on Broadway, and he knew a guy who was fired 2 weeks before he was supposed to take over as Scar." "Yeah, but that's an established show on Broadway," Erin pointed out. "They have understudies for the understudies, not to mention standby and swing performers. There are tons of people who could step in at the last minute to take over. We only have Mitchell, and he's a mess." Jacob's understudy was a mediocre actor at best, still didn't know all his lines, and had missed more than his fair share of rehearsals. Everyone knew the only reason Mona cast him was because his grandparents were big donors to the theater. Erin's insides twisted like one of Matt's glass knots. Jacob played the dual role of Edward Rochester and his inspiration, Constantine Heeger. If Jacob left, she would have to start over from scratch, building chemistry with a new actor. But there was nothing she could do about it. Maybe someday when she was a huge star, she could have a say in casting. But for now, she was stuck. "Did you get your final fittings done?" she asked instead. The costume department was working overtime to get everyone's costumes finished by dress rehearsal. "Yes, the corsets are still horrible, though," Jocelyn sighed. "Corsets are always horrible," Erin said. "I have a fitting scheduled for after rehearsal today, and I'm hoping it doesn't take long. I still have to go grocery shopping, unpack from my trip, and do laundry tonight." The conversation moved on to other topics until their break ended, and they joined the rest of the cast for the walk back to the theater. Chapter 6. "Give it up, Matt," Corbin said. "You're so deep in the friend zone that she'll probably ask you to be her maid of honor." Matt chucked a baby carrot at him. It bounced off Corbin's arm and went skittering across the room. "You're supposed to be giving me hope," Matt said as he got up to retrieve the carrot. They had dragged folding chairs into the showroom for lunch, and if they left a mess, they would definitely hear about it from Ma. Corbin took a long swig of soda. "I don't know what to tell you. I mean, if it's supposed to happen, don't you think it would have by now?" "I hate that saying." Matt scowled. "All the same," Corbin said, unruffled. "You've been after this girl for what, over a year now?" 2 years, Matt admitted sheepishly. He dropped the carrot into the garbage and took his seat again. "And people say I'm stubborn?" Corbin said. 2 years wasn't that long, was it? Matt was a patient guy. He hadn't been looking for a relationship when he'd first met Erin in the parking lot of their apartment building. At first, he'd been content to become good friends. Not only was she gorgeous and fun, she had a larger-than-life personality that demanded attention. Her energy was infectious, and he loved to watch how her eyes sparkled when she grabbed on to a new idea and ran with it. Eventually, his feelings grew to something deeper, but hers didn't. Every time he broached the subject, Erin shut down faster than the DMV at quitting time. She claimed they had no chemistry. But they did. Well, chemistry the way he defined it, not the way Erin defined it. To Matt, chemistry meant balance. Like how sand was just sand until a little bit of ash and lime turned it into the perfect batch of melted glass. It was like that for him. As hokey as it sounded, Erin made him feel whole, complete. But to Erin, chemistry meant explosions. It meant dumping a handful of Mentos into a glass of Coke and jumping back to watch the show. She wanted fireworks. Could he ever give her what she wanted? And would she ever give him the chance to try? "So, I'm in the friend zone," he said to Corbin. "What do I do about it?" "Besides giving up?" Corbin asked. When Matt nodded, he rolled his eyes. "You've got to break the stereotype." "Meaning?" "The best friend, good guy stereotype. She's got you wrapped around her little finger and she knows it. She calls and you come running. I know you worship the ground she walks on, bro, but so does she, and I'm telling you, most girls don't find that very exciting." "I work with molten glass," Matt pointed out. "That's one step away from red-hot lava. What's not exciting about that?" "Should have played it up earlier. Now it's just part of who you are," Corbin said. "Wouldn't it be better to get over her and move on?" "Yeah, I guess you're right. I can't see myself with anyone but her." Matt picked at the label on his bottle of lemonade and sighed. "But if she's not interested, she's not interested." The chime on the front door rang, and they both turned to see their mother enter the studio. She ran the showroom, but since traffic was light on Monday mornings, she usually didn't come until afternoon. She was a small woman, several inches shorter than Matt or Corbin, and rather stern, but with a huge soft spot for her sons. Her shoulder-length blonde hair had started showing a little silver at the temples. Or maybe she'd decided to quit coloring it. Matt wasn't about to ask. Her blue eyes were bracketed by crow's feet and had never quite lost the glaze of grief from their father's death. "Hi, Ma. Want some lunch?" Corbin called. "No, and you two shouldn't be eating in here." She frowned, glancing at the carpet under their chairs for any telltale crumbs. "We're being careful," Matt assured her, feeling guilty for no reason. She gave them the stink eye, as only Ma could, and went into the office to go over the accounts while they cleaned up and returned to the workshop. Matt worked all afternoon on autopilot. The mayor's ornaments were easy, and his mind had time to wander. As always, he found his thoughts returning to Erin. He wasn't a quitter, but maybe Corbin was right. Maybe it was time to admit defeat. Or maybe he just needed a new plan. End of part 1.